All right, like I said, today you're going to need your computer. You're going to want to be in Canvas, but really the only thing that you'll need to access is the file from yesterday, this Unit 1 and 2 curriculum guide. Kind of the deal, today, rather than me going and like reading every bit of it, because that's going to get old for all of us, I'll ask you guys before we get started here in a second to just kind of glance over the rest of the unit. So when you're glancing over stuff, again, I kind of went over this yesterday, but you want to look at the title, Dar al-Islam, for instance. Always look at illustrative examples. Kind of look at the theme just so you know what the standard's over, but this is in culture. Look over the learning objective, look over the historical developments. Again, the themes you can just glance at, but I do want you to kind of read over these just real briefly as we go along. That way, when I'm going through the PowerPoint or hopping back over here and just kind of mentioning something, you kind of know what we're doing, what we're talking about, the sort of things that you need to be looking for. We are going to get through Unit 1 today. We're going to move pretty darn fast. And we will even get through, hopefully, fingers crossed, Unit 2, the networks of exchange, which is quite a ways down here. Again, it's all 1200 to 1450, so we're going to move pretty fast. The main thing is just kind of glance over the curriculum guide as we move along, as we talk about each particular topic. So that's kind of what we're doing today. That's more or less what it's going to be like the next several days. We should next week, I'm hoping, we can kind of condense some of this stuff to where we can do 2 units a day. That's the game plan. But again, it just kind of depends on how long things take. Either way, we will be through all the content we need to review next week. And then the following week, it'll just all be skills, looking at SAQ and DBQ and LAQ and thesis writing and all that good fun stuff. Okay, multiple choice questions. All in an effort to get you ready for the AP exam on May the 10th. Aside from what we're doing in class today, tonight before midnight, your first notebook check of the 6 weeks is due. We've got a lot of stuff due this week. This is the final thing, thankfully. But it's really important because it's an easy daily grade, but it's also going to combine with your next notebook check for your probably final test grade. And in the next notebook check, it's going to be super easy. So do a good job on this. Use this as a test grade that could really help you out. But before it becomes a test grade, it starts with this daily grade, notebook check number 1. You need Cold War PowerPoint notes, and you need notes for each day that we did those Heimler's history videos. And there was like 2 little units that we did per day. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of notes, but there needs to be some. Again, that's due before midnight. Please get that in. As far as AP mock exams, I am going to open up the online Canvas mock exam at midnight. It will remain open all the way up until 11:59 on Sunday. It's a full-length exam. Okay, it's going to be 3 hours and 15 minutes as far as the time limit. You're going to go through all the sections like you really would on the real exam. Multiple choice, SAQs, DBQ, LAQ. Again, if you can get through it all and you can finish the whole thing, I could give you up to 20 points of extra credit. I will also send you like a breakdown of how you did and the score you would have gotten. If you don't get through with it all, I can still give you some extra credit. There's 4 sections. I'm saying 20 points. So kind of for each section, I'll probably give you 5 points. But try to get through the whole thing. That'll kind of give you a sense. If you're taking the AP test, you really need to sit for that length of time and just suffer through that sort of test. Because, again, the experience, it'll at least give you a better idea of what to expect on the real thing. That is an opportunity, but that's just going to last this weekend. But you can log in and do it whenever you want throughout that time period. The in-person mock exams, we still got a few left. There's one up here tomorrow in the cafeteria starting at 8 a.m. There are 2 other opportunities coming up. We've got one Thursday the 29th. We've got one, I guess, next Saturday on the 1st. Same deal. It's a different exam, but if you can get through the whole thing, I'll give you 20 points. I'll give you a breakdown of how you did. And that's the really valuable thing, the breakdown and also your anticipated AP score. Again, it's a different exam, so it's 20 additional points, but that one you do need to sign up for advance. And lastly, AP test prep tutorials, we're still doing them. We got 2 more the next 2 Thursdays. If you can't make it, I do tape those. So they are posted in Canvas now. Real basic stuff, just kind of talking about multiple choice, SAQ. Next couple weeks, we're focusing on essay writing. Again, if you're taking the AP test, I do think that it could happen. So with that being said, if you haven't already done so, please open that curriculum document. Scroll down to where it says Dar al-Islam, the world of Islam. And as I'm talking about Islam, just kind of glance and see what's in the curriculum document. So give you a little preview. And again, I'm not going to read it all today because that gets very tiresome and it takes a long time. Again, you guys can read this stuff. And I'll bounce back and forth every once in a while, but basic things, okay? So some of the Islamic states that you need to think about, 1200 to 1450, the Seljuks, the Mamluks, the Delhi Sultanate. Basic historical developments, that's the sort of stuff you want to look for. How Islam, Judaism, and Christianity were kind of, very interconnected. All monotheistic faiths have a lot of the same beliefs, hold, the same areas, at least some of them, very sacred. Under governance, it talks about the Abbasid Caliphate, how they get replaced by Turkic peoples, but a lot of the same stuff comes up. Talks about the expansion of Islam. Also talks about, their big time interest in intellectual innovation and transfers, and then gives some specific examples. Again, I'm going to be hitting up on most of this stuff, but as I'm talking about it, be glancing at the curriculum guide and following along in the curriculum guide. That way you kind of have some idea of where this stuff is coming from. So with that being said, let's get back to the global tapestry. Again, this unit is all about, who's around. Okay, who are some of the main players? How are they establishing their governments? All that good fun stuff. So let's get to the point that we were actually at. And again, just a reminder, you do need to take some notes over each unit. So unit 1, I need to see some notes. Unit 2, some notes, but doesn't have to be a lot. Okay, a few things, very minimal. That's fine because we've taken notes over this stuff before. This is just to kind of give you stuff to key in on, things to think about. Hey, I don't really remember that much about Marco Polo. Maybe I need to study up on it. Okay, that's the sort of stuff that we're talking about. Again, your next notebook check, not the one tonight, but the one that's coming up after this, it's primarily just going to be these unit notes. And guys, if with a tiny bit of effort, that's super easy. I'm not asking for much. Unit 1, 4 or 5 words. Unit 2, 4 or 5 words. That's fine. Okay, obviously you're encouraged to do a little bit more than that, but you don't have to. Okay, so take it for what it is. Take it as a good opportunity. So we talked about East Asia, China, Middle Kingdom, Confucianism, all that good fun stuff. Let's move on to Dar al-Islam. We had said that, prior to 1200, the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East, they were the chief center of the Islamic world. They're the ones, that really helped conquer and control most of the Middle East, most of Northern Africa. Okay, they spread Islam through warfare, through proselytizing, trying to get converts, but also heavily through trade. The Islamic world has always been interested in trade. Muslims have a tradition of being traders. Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was a trader before, he became the founder of this new faith. So very much interested in trade, and a lot of that has to do with their geographical position. They're right there in the Middle East. Okay, that is a natural crossroads of trade for Asia, Africa, and Europe. Okay, a lot of the trade routes, including the Silk Road routes and Indian Ocean trade routes, they naturally are going to funnel through there. So it meant that the Muslim world, they got exposed to a lot of different ideas, stuff from Europe, stuff from Asia, stuff from Africa. So it was kind of this hotbed of cultural diffusion, knowledge and technology, math and science. Just they were very, very innovative. It's one of the things the Abbasids and some of the later Muslim empires are kind of known for. Now, eventually the Abbasids go away. In many places, they're replaced by the Seljuks. That was probably the first big group that comes in and supplants them from most of their territory. They are Turks. They're not Arabs, okay? So ethnically, they're different, but they also become Muslims, okay? So it's kind of a shift of Dar al-Islam mainly being in the hands of Turks rather than Arabs. That is a big change that happens in this time period. The Seljuks, they come in. They're from Central Asia. They conquer a lot of the Middle East. They, for a while, controlled Jerusalem and Israel. That's one of the things that really launches the Crusades. Bless you. Because Europeans, are no longer to get free access to the Holy Land, because, again, kind of what we're talking about. Christians and Muslims, they share a lot of the same beliefs. To Christians, Israel, Jerusalem, I mean, that's the birth of Christianity. To Muslims, very sacred as well. So the Crusades happened in part because of the Seljuk Turks, and in part because, the Pope calls on European Christians to go and retake the Holy Land. And for the next couple hundred years, starting a little bit before this time period, but going in well after this time period, you've got these sort of holy wars being fought. The thing is, this gets Europeans trading and traveling again, gets them exposed to a lot of the outside world, gets them exposed to a lot of ideas that they had lost back in Europe, including some of the ideas from Greece and Rome. But the Muslim world always held on to that. Okay, again, all about knowledge and innovation. You got other groups like the Mamluks. You got the Delhi Sultanate, the first real Muslims to rule over parts of India. And then eventually, towards the end of this time period, you get the Ottomans, also Turks. Now, at the very beginning of the next time period, it's like 1453, the Ottomans conquer the trade city, the capital city of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople. And it's really with that the Byzantine, kind of what's left of the Roman Empire, goes away more or less forever. And this area of the world becomes, pretty thoroughly Islamic. And the Ottomans, as you know, will be kind of the big Muslim empire moving forward. They're going to be around until World War I. So other little things to think about, okay? We talked about the different groups. A couple important cities. You've got Cordoba in Spain, what is now Spain. For a long time, the Iberian Peninsula was ruled over by Muslims. Now, towards the end of this time period, that's starting to change. Europeans, such as who becomes the Spanish and the Portuguese, they start to push them out. But Cordoba was always this big trade city. It was always this center of learning. Think back to that one video I showed you where they were talking about all the innovations in science. The guy that created like the hang glider and then he crashed and he broke his back and stuff. I mean, that was Cordoba. You've got Baghdad. That was the capital of the Abbasid Empire or Caliphate. That's where you had the House of Wisdom, the renowned territory where, all these intellectuals would come together and share ideas. But that was pretty much destroyed when the Mongols came in and conquered the Abbasids and conquered a lot of these other groups as well. Thing is, when the Mongols leave, they also, by and large, the ones that stick around the Middle East and Central Asia, they convert to Islam. And that just further spreads the faith. So some other important things, and we're just going to kind of go over these various little tidbits that they have here. You look at this little person in blue. It says libraries preserve Greek and Islamic knowledge or thought and transferred it back to Europe. Guys, after the fall of the Roman Empire, when Europe goes into the Dark Ages, around the 500s to almost about 1,000, it's unstable. Okay, it's chaotic. You've got all these outsiders, these barbarian hordes, fighting each other for years and years and years before you have some semblance of order. Okay, that's why feudalism comes about. These kings need people to be loyal to them. They start giving out grants of land. And that's what kind of creates the decentralized government you see in Europe for many, many years. But they're cut off from a lot of the rest of the world. They're not really engaged in a whole bunch of trade. A lot of those older ideas of the Greeks and the Romans, it's like Europe takes a step backwards. They're not quite as advanced as they once were. So whereas a lot of stuff, from Greece and Rome kind of falls, by the wayside, the Islamic world holds on to it because they are very concerned with the acquisition of knowledge. So later on, when Europeans are more interacting with the Islamic world, that's when they start to rediscover some of this stuff. And it's really with those rediscoveries, that's one of the things that brings on the Renaissance, like in the 12 and 13 and 1400s, where you've got this rediscovery of art and architecture and all those cool things. Kind of opens the door for everything else that comes. Age of exploration, the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, it all kind of stems from these rediscoveries. The little heart says polymaths. Those are really smart people good at a lot of things. Like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina innovated and advanced Greek medical knowledge. These guys are referenced in the curriculum guide. And I don't think you're going to be asked a question like, hey, what did Al-Razi do? No. But remember the basic theme. The Muslim world was home to a lot of advancement, okay? Medical, scientific, literary advancement, you name it, technology, some of which they came up with on their own. Other things, came from Asia and kind of filtered through the Middle East. And that's how Europeans learned about them. Or vice versa. Things came from Europe and Africa and filtered through Muslim-held territories and then moved further to the east. Good example of this, Arabic numerals, the numbers we use today, okay? They're called Arabic numerals because Europeans learned about them from the Arabs, but the Arabs learned about them from India. So again, it's kind of this center of cultural diffusion. And rather than concentrating on every single person that they mention, remember the big ideas, lots of innovations in math and science, because that is part of who they are. That's part of their identity. Persian polymath Nasir al-Din Tutsi creates, as its own field, trigonometry. There's a good example there. Ashia bint Yusuf Baniya, a Sufi poet, is the most prolific female Arabic writer prior to 1900. The world throughout history is very patriarchal, okay? And Islam, to this day, does have some very patriarchal aspects. We've talked about the hijab, the modest dress of women, limited rights and stuff. But you got to understand, back in these days, they were probably more permissive and were more about egalitarianism, men and women being seen more as equals than most of the rest of the world. The thing is, as time progressed and a lot of the Western world started, promoting more and more equality over the next several centuries, I think you could say the Muslim world was a little slower to do that. And that's kind of why things look how they are today. Remember Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Okay, it's not even really in this time period. Well, it is, but barely. Because the Mongols burn it down and throw all the books in the river, the Abbasids were known for bookmaking, something they learned from the Chinese. But this was the big symbol, the House of Wisdom, a place where people from all walks of life, Christians, Jews, you name it, could come and learn and share ideas, because the acquisition of knowledge was a big thing within the Muslim world. There's also the Sufis. Now, when you look at Islam, the two main branches are the Sunni and the Shiite. And they split almost immediately after the death of Muhammad because they couldn't decide on who was going to be the successor. And from there, some slightly different beliefs did develop. And today, sometimes those groups do not like each other. There's another branch, though, the Sufis, okay, Sufism. Okay, and this is one that comes up a lot, all right? They were these wandering mystics, okay? They were Muslims, but they weren't like as strict in their beliefs. They were much more free-spirited. They were all about the mystical world, kind of forming a personal connection with God. And because they wandered around so much, and because their version of Islam was a little bit more accessible to some, they kind of helped spread the faith. I mean, Islam spreads all over, due to missionary work like this, due to trade. That's why Indonesia, becomes the country out there with the largest Muslim population in the world. I mean, that's kind of what you need to associate with this time period. All right, if you will, scroll down to your next little subunit in your curriculum guide. Let me show it to you. And again, we kind of hit up on pretty much everything in here, but I do want you to kind of glance back and forth to make sure we're covering what we need to. Let's go to developments in South and Southeast Asia. Now, I'll be straight with you. You're going to have a hard time remembering all these different kingdoms and empires, all right? The main thing is remembering how they unified their territory. By and large, it was through Hinduism and Buddhism. And those got there, what do you know, via trade. So let's move on to our next little part, South and Southeast Asia. You don't have to remember much about these guys, okay? Like I said, periodization, you at least need to know that they're around during this time period. In South Asia, you got the Delhi Sultanate. You got the Gujarat area, which is mainly one big city. It's a region, but it's known for that city of Gujarat, big-time trade destination, as is Calicut. It's right there on the coastline. Again, you look at these areas on the coastline of the Indian Ocean Basin. The College Board likes to call it the Indian Ocean Basin. It's weird. But you look along the coastlines, I mean, that's where a lot of these prominent groups really develop. And it's because, seeing that they're on the coastline, cities are going to develop there. Traders along the Indian Ocean are going to stop. They're going to resupply. They're going to trade. And that gives the people that control these destinations, these cities, a lot of wealth, a lot of power. Okay. You look at the names, Vijayanagara and Sinhalese and the Khmer and Srivijaya and Majapahit and all these guys. It's going to be hard to remember everything about them, but just remember this. They thrived because of their location along Indian Ocean trade routes, and they united their territories by and large through religion. Okay, but almost all these religions were imported religions, foreign religions that got there via trade. You look at Southeast Asia, you look at a group like, the Srivijaya, by and large Hindu. Okay, you look at the Majapahit, which are here in kind of this little pink area. They become Buddhists. You got the Khmer Empire that starts off, and they were known for their big temple complex, out in the jungle, Angkor Wat. But they start off as Hindu, they convert to Buddhism. But either way, religion sometimes can be the thing that unites the population. And really, under their rule, that was their identity. Their identity was wrapped up in their control of territories that trade funneled through, and also their belief systems. So most of Southeast Asia, we're looking at Buddhism and Hinduism. Okay, Hinduism doesn't really spread a whole lot outside of India, but it does to some extent to Southeast Asia because it's pretty close. The big difference is the Spice Islands, okay? The area that will eventually collectively become Indonesia, a little bit of Malaysia eventually goes this route too. They become Muslims, all right? And this is a direct reflection of all of the Muslim traders that not only were involved in trade in their region, but traveled as traders, okay? Muslims that came to Indonesia, we call those, basically the people that formed a diasporic community. Okay, diaspora just means to disperse, a group that disperses from their homeland. When the majority of Jews left the Middle East, they dispersed around the Mediterranean. When Africans were enslaved and forced to come to the Americas, sometimes that's called the African diaspora because they dispersed away from their homelands. Well, here you've got Muslim traders, okay? Indonesia is a diasporic community. You had Chinese traders that kind of moved around the coastline, went to Southeast Asia. That's a diasporic community. Okay, there's a lot of diasporic communities. They mention some in the curriculum guide specifically, but know that that's a phenomenon during this time period, mainly because there's so much more trade. In fact, our next unit is just about trade. These are groups that are really prominent in the Americas. Now, remember, these guys trade, but they don't got wheels. They don't have horses. They don't have large beasts of burden. So it's a lot more difficult for the Americas to be really interconnected than it is the old world of Afro-Eurasia. There is still trade, like up in Cahokia, the Mississippians using the rivers, that certainly helped. But it is much more limited. And the civilizations in general are usually a little bit more compact. Now, you do have big empires. I mean, you got the beginnings here of the Inca Empire, which will get huge. It'll go all throughout the Andes. And they do build a large networks of road, at least to try to promote trade and travel. But just know that's a little bit more difficult for them. The Aztec become a huge empire, but theirs is mainly a tributary empire where they control Tenochtitlan, the main group does, the Mexica, and the groups around them, they're kind of, having to buy them off. So it is an empire, but it's a little bit differently. Big thing here is to know who's around, okay? I would say the most important ones are the Inca, the Mayan city-states, which are pretty much on the decline at this point, and the beginnings of the Aztec Empire. But also know, especially in Mesoamerica, Mexico and South America, lots of cultural borrowing. I mean, you look at like the pyramids and the calendars and human sacrifice that you see in the Aztec Empire. Well, a lot of that they borrowed from the Maya, who borrowed a lot of that from the Olmec. They believe in a lot of the same gods because, again, they are so closely related that sort of history passes on, even though the civilizations are slightly different. Again, associate them with this time period, associate, how they ruled. The Maya had city-states where they controlled a central city like Chichen Itza, and they would have temples and they would have their rituals and they would, have a lot of beliefs in the afterlife and in the stars that would dictate a lot of what they did. But it wasn't like one united civilization. You look at that area there in yellow, that's not usually like one king ruling it all. It's a bunch of little independent city-states, much like the ancient Greeks used to have, that kind of politically and economically all did their own thing. We just put them together because culturally, they speak the same languages, they have the same beliefs, they build the same stuff. They're all essentially the same groups of people, but politically they're independent from each other. The Aztec are a little bit different, okay? We say Aztec collectively because it's a bunch of different tribes. The main tribe was the Mexica, okay? That's who Mexico's actually named after. They were the central tribe of the Aztec Empire. They built this large empire, but they didn't directly control most of it, okay? They controlled it through other people who essentially worked for them, who essentially were a part of their tributary system. Something you got to understand because a lot of people do it. Tributary system is pretty much, every year you got to bow down, you got to pay tribute to hear the Mexica, to Tenochtitlan. And if you do that, they'll leave you alone. If you don't, they'll probably roll in and kill you. Again, it's a weird way of doing things. One thing you have here, though, and it's something, it's not really much of our curriculum anymore, but you got the Polynesians. Okay, there's a lot of migrations during this time period. A lot of different groups that move to different areas, like the Turks coming to the Middle East, becoming Muslims. Okay, the Polynesian people from Southeast Asia, near the Philippines, out in the Pacific, they were these great explorers. They were these great sailors. If you ever saw the movie Moana, that's the Polynesians. And they made it, further than anybody had up to this point. They made it all the way to Easter Island off the coast of South America. Some say they may have gotten to South America several hundred years before Columbus. Again, it's debatable, but they're one of the many groups during this period that moved around in mass, kind of bringing their culture with them. Next, we go on to Africa. Again, a lot of this is understanding who's around during these times. Okay, during this period of 1200 to 1450, you've got the Empire of Mali. That's where Mansa Musa was from. You've got various Hausa kingdoms right next door. You've got Ethiopia. You've got the Swahili city-states here on the east coast of Africa. And you've got Great Zimbabwe, which was, pretty much identified as this great big city. It had stone walls. You didn't see a whole lot of that in Africa at the time. It was very influential. The big thing here is trade. A lot of its location, where they were located along the naturally occurring trade routes, okay? You look here on the East Coast, Ethiopia, especially the Swahili city-states, it was all about Indian Ocean trade, okay? Gold and ivory and unfortunately slaves and a lot of different things, are being exported and imported via the Indian Ocean. Again, that is a continuity. The areas that are along the trade routes, they typically do really well for themselves. On the other side, in the West, it's all about trans-Saharan trade, okay? If you want to think about the resources, there's a lot of them. Remember, gold and salt. And again, you look at Mali, the reason that it just thrives so much, it controlled a good chunk of the trade routes, the parts that weren't directly in the Sahara Desert. And anytime you have, control of a significant portion of a trade route, and you have some good, well-equipped cities that can help to serve as these trade hubs, you're going to gain wealth. There's a lot of civilizations that have rose up and have gotten an immense amount of wealth just because they control the trade routes. I mean, the Mongols, we're going to talk about them here in a second, excellent example of that. One other thing, you look out in the Sahara Desert, because camels aren't actually indigenous to Africa. They come from the Middle East. They had come over here about 600 years before our time period, and people learned that, hey, we can ride these things. Okay, they had to develop a wide variety of camel saddles. That is some technology that was absolutely necessary during this time period for people to trade throughout the Sahara Desert. They did that. They adapted to their environment, and because of that, they thrived. It's also during this time period, unfortunately, the late part of this time period, that the Europeans kind of start checking out Africa more and more. And that all starts with Portugal. Remember, Portugal's at the forefront of the age of exploration. So even before 1450, they were building new ships, they were using new technology, they were exploring. Their goal was to get all the way around Africa. And even though they don't do that until the very late 1400s, they had more experience and knowledge of the African coastline than anyone else. It's no coincidence that later on, once they've got colonies in the New World, specifically Brazil, they're kind of the original European country that initiates the transatlantic slave trade. And finally, you got Europe. Big old mess during this time period, but it's starting to come together. Leading up to 1200, you're looking at feudal kingdoms, decentralized government that fought with each other all the time. Really, though, after the 100 Years' War and the Black Death, that comes in the 1300s, so many workers had died that there was more competition for people to move to these cities, to get these jobs. Under feudalism, especially like the serfs, they were bound to the land. They had to live there and work there. But because, there was a scarcity of labor, well, feudalism starts to die out. Because of the 100 Years' War, there's more of a sense of national identity. Because of the Crusades and the Renaissance, you've got more trade and travel. Okay, so a lot of things are changing. One big trade federation that they bring up quite a bit is the Hanseatic League. I don't think it's on here. Is it? Yes, it is. It's right here. They were in Northern Europe. Again, they really dominated trade in the region. But this is the time period where they're trading a lot more. That starts to change a little bit in 1453, just after this time period when the Ottomans take Constantinople. Because once that happens, and the Ottomans and their buddies, the Venetians here in Italy, who are always trading, the reason the Renaissance started in Italy is because they had a lot of money because, again, they were traders. You start to see Europeans look outside of Europe trying to find new routes to Asia. Again, lots of crazy stuff here. We got the Kiev Rus, in Russia, the beginnings of Russia. They got ruled over in a tributary relationship by the Mongols. That particular khanate was the Golden Horde. It's later on in the next time period where these city-states like Kiev and Novgorod unite, that they're able to drive out the Mongols and ultimately establish the Russian Empire. Key vocabulary. I'm not going to go over every definition because we don't have time. But these are some things to know. Some of them we talked about, some of them we didn't. But I would say all these somewhere, if you took good notes, they're in there. If there's stuff you don't know, I would know it, because this is the sort of stuff that if you have questions over this unit on the AP exam, I'm betting that these terms will be used. Like I said many times throughout the year, this exam in part is a vocabulary exam. The thing that makes it hard is they use all of this academic sort of terms and names, and if you don't know what they mean, it's going to be really hard to figure anything out. Okay, so here's some of the things to know. Filial piety, bureaucracy, meritocracy, Champa rice, Grand Canal, tributary system, syncretism, the Hayyan period, shogunate, feudalism, Dar al-Islam. But wait, there's more. Jizya, caliphate, sultanate, house of wisdom, Sufism, city-state, manorialism, theocracy, Mita, Great Zimbabwe, Mansa Musa, Magna Carta, Great Schism, Crusades, Marco Polo, the Little Ice Age, and the Renaissance. And that is it for Unit 1. But we ain't done, because we got to do Unit 2. The good thing is Unit 2 is going to move pretty fast. Networks of exchange, it's the same time period, just a little bit different of a focus. It's all about trade. It's all about these connections. And when trade occurs in these distant civilizations, it's not just goods that are moving, it's ideas, it's religions, it's languages, it's diseases, it's all that stuff. So if you will, just kind of scroll down in your curriculum guide, kind of follow along. Let's look at Unit 2, Networks of Exchange. And we're going to start off with the Silk Roads. We'll then talk just a little bit about the Mongols. We'll talk about Indian Ocean. We'll talk about trans-Saharan trade. Some of it we kind of already touched on. So I think we can get through this pretty fast. At least I'm going to try to. So networks of exchange, here we go. So same setup as last time. I'm going to start off with a little context. I'll give you some significant events, and then we'll discuss some trends. Before 1200, trade networks were largely local, usually between civilizations bordering each other. However, with more technological innovations allowing merchants to travel farther and more efficiently, and the growing demand for goods in growing empires, trade routes began to rapidly expand. That is a huge thing to remember about this time period, 1200 to 1450. Especially in the old world, people are becoming more and more interconnected, and things are spreading, diffusing more than ever before. As these routes, such as the Silk Roads, began to spread, they carried new goods and ideas with them, such as Buddhism and the development of diasporic communities, talked about that a minute ago, where merchants settled down in different states other than their own. Knowledge began to travel faster than ever before. So some significant events. And again, this is the same time period we just discussed, but this is kind of more centered on things that maybe were connected to trade, such as the Crusades. Started before this time period, ended after this time period, but it's going on during this time period. The Crusades, European Christians going to the Middle East, fighting against Muslims, trying to retake the Holy Land. Lots of people died. Nothing's really accomplished, except for the fact that now Europe is kind of opened back up, much more than they had been in the previous centuries. Because really, during those dark ages, it's kind of like Asia and Africa, they're trading. There's some stuff going along the coastline of Europe, but it's fairly limited. The Crusades kind of helps bring on the Renaissance, and everything starts to change. And by the time we get to the 1450s, man, Europe's back in the loop, and they want to be even more in the loop, reaching Asia directly. We already talked about this, but the Mongols sacked Baghdad. They ended the Abbasid Caliphate in 1258. Marco Polo, not just the game in a pool. He travels all around. We're going to look at that here in a minute, from 1271 to 1295. Writes about his adventures, makes people curious about the outside world. Once you get the printing press, man, this is one of the first books that gets really popular. One of Columbus's favorite books. The peak of the Mongol Empire and the Pax Mongolica on the Silk Roads occurred in 1279. The Ottoman Empire comes on the scene, 1299, that lasts all the way to 1921. Ibn Battuta, another great traveler, is active from 1325 to 1349. The bubonic plague, the Black Death, hits Europe in 1347, stays around for the next year or so, hits here and there at other times, but this is the main time period. And then Zheng He, that Chinese explorer working for the Ming, is really doing his thing from 1405 to 1433. So what are some major trends as far as trade? Well, first, there's more trade. There's trade of commercial technology. This just helps everybody have a greater ability to trade. Examples of commercial technology include the astrolabe, the compass, the caravanserai, which is like roadside inns that become trade hubs. Again, those other two, they're going to help, especially with the Indian Ocean trade and exploration. The caravanserai, a lot of those do become big trade cities. But even before that, these kind of resting spots along the trade routes, it's where traders would congregate and do business and talk and share ideas. New commercial tech, you got a lot of growth, in commerce, in businesses, and the states help that. State practices and highly developed commercial infrastructure led to commercial growth. Some of the things that states did to encourage trade: the Chinese build the Grand Canal. Many different groups in what was the Holy Roman Empire, they create the Hanseatic League, which encourages trade. The Inca, they don't have wheels and stuff, but they can build some roads, and that helped trade and travel in their empire. Commercial infrastructure, again, it goes right back to the Grand Canal. Expansion of empires through trade. Some empires, just by their existence, helped trade. The Mongols, by the time they take over, a lot of Asia, the Silk Road wasn't as frequented as it once was. But once they control almost the whole thing, they're getting really rich off of it, taxing everybody, but they're also keeping everything safe. The Islamic Empire is always all about trade. Before them, the Byzantine Empire. Remember, it was the Byzantine that controlled that huge trade hub of Constantinople. Eventually, the Ottomans will take it away from them. And the Chinese are always interested in trade, too. You've also got movement of people, okay? There's a lot of different huge migrations during this time period. In Africa, before this time period, but it was kind of wrapping up during this time period, you've got the Bantu migration, a group from Western Africa that moved throughout Africa south of the Sahara for several hundred years, spreading their Swahili language, spreading their use of ironworks, spreading their use of agriculture, really changed a lot of culture south of the Sahara. You've got the Polynesian migration. We talked about that earlier. It too had been going on for a long time, but they're sailing throughout the Pacific, getting to a bunch of the islands. It's why a lot of the Pacific islands are so similar culturally. You've got the Turks from Central Asia, originally different groups of nomads that migrated to the Middle East. They do, by and large, convert to Islam. The Mamluks, the Seljuks, the Ottomans, they're all Turks. And you've got Arabs even before that. And a lot of that comes with the Abbasid Caliphate and some of the earlier caliphates, really waging all these wars to kind of spread the Islamic faith. Well, a lot of Arabs left the Middle East and moved to North Africa. To this day, North Africa, ethnically, predominantly Arab. And with all this movement, religions are changing hands, military ideas are changing hands, diseases, animals, farming techniques, you name it. So again, your big networks of exchange, you've got the Silk Roads. There's some key cities like Kashgar and Samarkand, huge spots of cultural diffusion. You've got your Indian Ocean trade. Sailors learn to use the monsoon winds and improve ship designs and stuff like the astrolabe and the compass to more efficiently sail and reach their destinations. In Africa, you've got the trans-Saharan trades. You've got gold and salt and camels, and of course the Islamic faith spreading, just like Buddhism spread very heavily along the Silk Roads. The Mongol Khanates eventually control most of the Silk Roads. They really aid in cultural diffusion. That's how gunpowder and whatnot moves from east to west. Again, you've got all sorts of travelers, people like Marco Polo from Europe goes and kicks it with Kublai Khan, and the Mongols comes back, writes about it. You got Ibn Battuta, a Muslim cleric, probably the most renowned traveler in world history. He goes everywhere, writing about how Islam was practiced in different ways. You've got this lady, Marjorie Kemp from England, one of the first female English writers to ever, really have her biography published. She writes about her travels to the Middle East. You've got the diffusion of all sorts of foods, citrus fruits, rice, bananas. Guys, citrus fruits and bananas, they come from Southeast Asia. Yet it's during these years that they move into the Middle East, they move into Africa, they eventually get to Europe as well. And you got a lot of diasporic communities that form in the process as people are moving around. Again, you've got the Silk Roads, kind of the original big trade network overland. A lot of luxury goods, that's the big thing. It's called the Silk Roads for the reason. But it's not just goods, it's diseases like the Black Death. It's religions like Buddhism, to some extent Hinduism. It's technology, paper making, from East Asia ends up in the Middle East. The Abbasids were known for that in Baghdad because of Silk Road trade. Block printing, plagues, champa rice, porcelain. The Sogdians were a trade group that formed their own diasporic merchant communities. And again, there's all sorts of big cities that rise up to service that trade. The Mongols help that. Okay, the Mongols, on one hand, they're bloodthirsty, they kill everyone, responsible for the deaths of millions. But once they take over this territory and they control pretty much the entirety of Silk Road trade, it's safer than ever. It's more efficient than ever. People only have one set of laws to follow, one set of taxes to pay, and because of that, more and more people start trading along the Silk Road. Silk Road's mainly about luxury goods. Indian Ocean, yeah, there's luxury goods there as well, but a lot of that has to do with bulk items. But I can't just overstate how much cultural diffusion comes from the Mongols because they interact with so many different people. So much stuff from Africa, Asia, and Europe, it's swapping hands, and the Mongols are a big part of that. Indian Ocean trade. It's all about the technology. It's all about the travelers, spices and whatnot. Lots of luxury goods, pepper and textiles, but also bulk goods like lumber because it's a lot more efficient to ship things by sea than it is over land. Taking advantage of their knowledge of the environment, their knowledge of monsoon winds, you see Indian Ocean trade in the Indian Ocean basin connect East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and all that stuff can eventually funnel into Europe as well. Again, Indian Ocean trade is what gets a lot of these different groups wealthy, which gives them an opportunity to retain power. And then finally, you got, trans-Saharan trade. Like I said, we kind of went over the main groups involved. Remember the role of camels and camel saddles. Remember some of the main trade goods. You've got a bunch of different stuff, but gold and salt likely the most prominent in trans-Saharan trade. Lots of obvious cultural consequences, the spread of different religions, the spread of different technology. There's also the environmental consequences. Sugar, bananas, citrus fruits coming from Southeast Asia over hundreds and even thousands of years, getting more noticeable and common, moving further and further to the west. Some stuff like champa rice, really aids the Chinese coming from Vietnam. Champa rice comes up a lot, aiding them with their foodstuffs and also boosting up their population. But you also got stuff that nobody wants, like the Black Plague. Interconnectedness, it's great for a lot of things. Religion, technology, language. That stuff spreads more effectively than ever, but so unfortunately does disease. And finally, a lot of key terms and names here. I know I'm going through this fast, but we're recording this, and it is online, the PowerPoints, the curriculum guide, all that good stuff. Make sure you're reviewing the curriculum guide as we go through this every day. But some key terms and names: caravanserai, textile, basic one, but you need to know it. Stern rudder, astrolabe, lateen sails, all sailing technology that help to boost trade. So does the Chinese junk, these huge trade ships. Luxury goods, things people want but they don't absolutely need. The Hanseatic League, Khanate, Pax Mongolica, the Spice Islands, Monsoon, Zhonghe. Not a lot of names referenced in the curriculum guide, like people, but when they are, you probably need to pay attention to it. Diasporic, indigenous, caravan, Bantu migration, Mansa Musa, diffusion, urbanization, pathogen, and of course the bubonic plague, aka the Black Death. The 1300s wipes out about half the European population. So that is it for today. Monday, we're going to start getting into Unit 3. I'm going to try to push through Unit 3 and 4. We'll just kind of see how quickly it goes. But this is going to be the deal for the next several days. I go through the PowerPoint. I'll reference things from the curriculum guide. Follow along. Wouldn't be a bad idea to read the curriculum guide for the units we're going to cover before you get to class. That way, if you got questions, you can ask them. That way, you kind of understand why we're talking about what we're talking about. But we will get through content next week, and after that, we'll work on skills. Last thing, remember, notebook check number 1 is due tonight. If you need anything, let me know.